Greetings and welcome to the March on Washington Film Festival's Spring Workshop Series, Minding Your Business, Pro Tips for Writers, Directors, and Producers. I'm Opal H. Bennett, Programming Consultant to the Film Festival, and we're delighted to have you with us. These workshops are designed to share vital information on filmmaking as a business and a craft from professionals in the field. March's workshop focused on writers. Today, we spotlight directors, and in May, we'll focus on producers. Films are an integral part of our work at the festival, along with first-person accounts from icons and foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, scholars' presentations, and the visual and performing arts. We rely on narrative and documentary films to help us unearth the mistold and untold stories and strategies of the movement. In the words of the great Marcus Garvey, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. That is the essence of our mission and that of all filmmakers who have an interest in social justice. The workshop discussions are curated and moderated by Craig Emanuel, festival board member and seasoned entertainment attorney. Craig has been involved in the development, production, and distribution of hundreds of film and television projects, and he's juried on an array of film competitions. As part of this workshop series, we are screening selected short films by past winners of the March on Washington's Film Festival's Emerging and Student Filmmaker Competition. The two films selected for today's workshop are They Took Them Alive by Emily Pedersen and An Act of Worship by Sufyan Khan and Nosheen Dadaboy. Emily's film won the grand prize in its category in 2017, and Sufyan and Nosheen's documentary won grand prize in 2018. First up is They Took Them Alive, following the story of Mexican student activists disappeared from their homes and the loved ones seeking justice from the Mexican government. We're delighted to have Emily Pedersen with us. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, thanks. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So good to see you. First off, please share with us how you came to this story.
Yeah, so at the time that I started the project, I was living in Mexico, and I was living with a family. And when the case of these 43 students who were abducted and killed by police, disappeared rather, but at this point it's assumed that they were killed. And I just saw how the people in my immediate around me were so devastated and affected by this event. And it really came to symbolize so much of the violence that had been happening in Mexico. And the fact that it was police that abducted them was really just like the mask came off of what so many people already had experienced and known of how the police are so involved in the corruption and the cartels. So it was a moment of huge social protest. And I was witnessing this, and basically a few months after they disappeared, there was still no solution. There was still no truth of what had happened to them. The investigation was being completely, sort of covered up and bungled. And there were pictures of the students on all the walls of the city where I was living, and they were starting to fade away. And so I decided to travel to the actual school where the students disappeared from. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to find when I got there or what I was planning to do. I actually come from a photography background. So I went there with the idea of doing some kind of photography. And I actually ended up staying there for about 2 months with the families of the students, traveling with them to protests and just documenting their search for their missing sons, uncles, cousins, etc. It was obviously an extraordinarily tough time for the families. And basically over the course of the next year, I continued to visit them. I did a crowdfunding campaign to support the project because I initially just went on my own. And, though I was living very frugally there with them, being able to stay at the school and whatnot, there's only so much you can do with your own little bit of savings.
Absolutely.
So I was able to do a crowdfunding campaign. And then about a year later, when I went to visit them again, after a few other visits, I found that these international investigators who were looking into it were basically being pushed out of the country. And I thought this was a really difficult moment of many difficult moments for the families. And it was one that I didn't feel like photographs could really do justice to, because how do you photograph an international criminal tribunal,
Right.
looking into this and the cover up that the government was doing? And so I started thinking a lot about video. And then right around that time, I happened to go to an event where Field of Vision was presenting some short films they had made. And Field of Vision is a platform that produces short documentaries. They fund them, and they basically said during the event, we're open to work with people who've never made a film before. And so that set off a light bulb in my head of, this could be a film.
Yeah.
This should be a film. And so I pitched to them, and they were thankfully open to the idea, and we started talking, and that was how it started.
Wow, that was quite a fortuitous meeting. The FOV is certainly a great group to be working with on a film with as much journalism as was present in what you covered in this film, and you did so quite effectively. So thank you so much for your work. I'd love to hear what's gone on with you in your filmmaking since 2017, and since us, getting to highlight They Took Them Alive.
Yeah, so I was really grateful for the support of the festival. That was a really special moment, and just being able to be part of that was really great, and it did a lot for the film. And after that, it went to other festivals. It especially was screened at a human rights festival in Spain, like various times in various different cities and places. And just to a number of different film festivals. It also got some recognition at the CNY Film Festival in upstate New York. And since then, basically, the major thing I did with filmmaking since then was collaborate with an organization called Immigrant Families Together, which was during the Trump administration, the separation of families at the border, which was just horrific. Basically, I had started working a day job by that time because, documentary photography and documentary video, as many of us know, is an extremely difficult field to survive in, especially when you're starting out. But I did take time out of my just off hours at that time, because I was just like, this is absolutely awful, and I want to see more done about this. And was able to find this organization, Immigrant Families Together, after doing a lot of research and contacting a lot of other organizations. Finally landed on them, and they were open to doing some interviews with some of the women who'd been separated from their children at the border. So I put out a piece with them that was mainly for them to use to basically speak to legislators about what was going on. And it was about the women, like, talking about the conditions and talking about what they went through, and, their experience of thinking they were only going to be separated from their child for a few hours, and then it was months, and this really intense trauma that they went through because of all of that.
So you continue to be a witness for folks who need their stories told. That is fantastic. Please keep it up. My last question is around similarly minded filmmakers like yourself. What tips you would give them in looking to sustain doing this kind of work, looking to continue the work?
I would say my number one biggest piece of advice is to really develop trust with the people that you're documenting. That, I think, is your number one job. It takes a lot of time to build up that trust a lot of the time, and it's really just about showing up with all of your humanity, and being there for them in many ways that are not necessarily involving the camera a lot of the time. And also giving back to the people that you're working with. I think especially if you're working with a community that's been harmed in some way. Something that John Berger, the art critic, really resonated with me that he wrote is about how basically if you're a documentarian and you see yourself, it's important to see yourself not only as documenting for bringing something to the rest of the world, but documenting to help preserve the history of the people that you're documenting for them.
Yes.
And I think that is just a really central thing to be aware of, and to kind of center the people that you're working with at the center of everything that you do.
Thank you so much for that, Emily.
Yeah.
That's super superb advice, and it's so great to have you with us. I am going to go to our next filmmaker guest and just remind everyone that your film will be playing on our Eventive platform throughout the month. Next, we have An Act of Worship, which captures the resistance to the 2017 Trump administration travel ban on Muslim countries. We're honored to have co-director Sufyan Khan join us. Welcome, Sufyan.
Thank you for having me here, Opal. It's nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. It's been a while.
Yeah.
So I know this story because I remember when Nasheen and you had begun, but please share with the audience, how did you come to making An Act of Worship?
Yeah, I would almost say that I think it came to us in some ways, I mean, we were, as Muslims filmmakers in America, both kind of, I was working on another film at the time about Afghan and Iraqi interpreters who worked with the U.S. Soldiers, and they were struggling to get their visas, and we were actually at the airport waiting for a interpreter who was going to be coming into the country because he kind of heard rumors of the possibility of this ban happening. So we were kind of on the ground there, and Nosheen had already realized that obviously Trump's election and some of his promises would lead to developments that she wanted to be on the ground for. So she was in LA, I was in New York. We were at the airports and we were filming as this sort of unfolded. So we both kind of we worked together quite a bit up to that point, and then we kind of connected about working on a film about the ban and about the resistance. And that's kind of how it came to be. And once again, Field of Vision played a role in it. Firelight Media, I was a producing fellow of Firelight Media, was partnering with Field of Vision on a sort of series that was First 100 Days was the name of it. It was a kind of quick reaction to cover some of the things that were happening in those first 100 days in 2017. And that was how the film happened. It happened very quickly. It happened sort of our backs were kind of against the wall, just watching all this unfold and figuring out how to make a film that would sort of encompass, that experience that was very chaotic. Yeah,
chaotic and historic, and you guys captured it beautifully. And I know that it's now become a feature length film.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's been the big development with us as far as this project. We immediately it was a great experience making something on a quick turnaround like that and being able to release it very quickly. I feel like it was really important to be able to do that, and that to be, nimble, and to have those partners who could be able to put something out where a documentary is not coming out as, let's say, an aftermath or something to comment on a historical event, but is actually part of the conversation as it's happening. So that was really important for the short film. But we realized as we were making it that the scope of this was much bigger, and we had kind of just connected with these activists who were really inspiring to us too, and it had a lot to do with seeing a younger generation that was much less apologetic, unapologetic essentially about in a way that I think for us as sort of a generation that grew up in the shadow of 9/11, we were kind of keeping our heads down, and it was like a different sort of that fascinated us, I think, and we wanted to follow that more. And then it was really important to also, and we heard this over and over again, I think, from the activists and the people who were, civil rights lawyers, everybody who was involved in this was kind of saying, look, this is a much bigger story. Like Trump is is an expression of this Islamophobia, but this has a much longer, and deeper history. So the feature project, we immediately started pitching. We had this short, and it was out there, and it felt like it was a good calling card to say, here's what we can do, and this is sort of what it's about, but it goes beyond. And we were lucky enough to have, support. Ford Foundation was our big support for this project, and have continued to, be at our side through the last, few years of making it. And we've had a lot of other great support as well, including Field of Vision, again, coming in Sundance Institute and others. So it's like chicken and egg has been amazing as well. I mean, I can go reel on, but it's like wonderful to get that kind of support. And, we're finally now finishing the film, which I feel as a contrast to the short, which was very much in the moment and part of the conversation of that particular time. I think the feature is reflecting on a much larger scope of history and context, understanding how Islamophobia has evolved in this country. Yeah.
Well, I cannot wait to see it. I was
soon
excited to hear that news because your short always stood out to me as certainly something that could go deeper. So I'm glad you both are doing so. My last question is around tips that you can give to filmmakers who are just starting out, and how best to go about creating a documentary filmmaker career that's sustainable.
Sure. Yeah, I think Emily spoke very wonderfully about that kind of connection with subjects and authenticity. I think that's just a very important part of what we do. I can speak a little bit to sort of thinking about that sustainability element, which is a huge preoccupation for us as we try to do this very somewhat difficult work. And I would say that our story in terms of taking a short film and then expanding it, I think could be useful for some folks out there thinking about that. Short filmmaking unto itself, unfortunately, is like not really sustainable. But I think that if it is at the same time giving you an asset, it's giving you the ability to go into a story, to start to build access and trust and all those things that are going to be crucial to making a larger project. So I would kind of, urge, it may not always be the case. Obviously there are short films that you say everything you need to say, but I think that it is something to keep your antenna up, to consider, am I making a project that could, be help me foray into something larger, which in most cases, would be a more sustainable project as well. So I would just sort of like throw that out there as something that I'm actually doing something very similar right now with a short project that I've just completed, and now kind of expanding it. So it's been something that's turned into it wasn't something I've done before, and now I'm finding myself doing it again. So I've just
a bit of a template. Yeah,
and it's been good. It's been helpful to be able to make something really solid, because I feel like otherwise we find ourselves sometimes spending money out of pocket, or finding some, using our credit card, and I've been there too, with the other project.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents for today.
Well, we will take it, and we thank you so much for sharing it. It's an absolute pleasure to see you, and we will be in touch. I want to hear more about that project.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sufyan. Be sure to catch They Took Them Alive and An Act of Worship, streaming free on Eventive for the rest of this month. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to our moderator, Craig Emanuel.
Thank you so much, Opal. Before I start, I really would like to thank the March on Washington Film Festival for not only giving me the opportunity to moderate these series of panels, but for them agreeing to do this in the first place. I think that if you look at what the March on Washington Film Festival is hoping to achieve, it's to bring attention to the fact that issues relevant to the cause of civil rights is not something that ended in the 60s, but it is as relevant today as it has been in the past. And we have a long way to go. I think for lots of us today, this afternoon in Minneapolis was a beginning of an important next step. And for the audience out there that I can't see, who I know is watching these panels this afternoon, I'm extremely appreciative of you taking the time to join us. I think as burgeoning filmmakers, you all have important stories to tell. And the ability to use media to direct content and create content that can move people and stir people's emotions is important. And so I hope that over the course of the rest of this panel discussion, and if you follow some of the other panel discussions, you'll be inspired, having heard of what some of the past filmmakers have just described in the last 10, 15 minutes, to go on and tell your own important stories. And we all have a responsibility and a duty to try and make the world a better place. And filmmakers have the unique ability to present these wonderful stories. So thank you. As mentioned, this afternoon is the second of a series of 3 panels focusing on issues relative to writers, directors, and producers. And this afternoon's panel is focusing on issues relevant to directors, but we're also lucky enough to have on the panel someone who has worked for many years as a sales representative, who will also discuss how the role of a sales or producer's representative can be extremely relevant and important to a director or a producer when they want to sell their movie. We're fortunate this afternoon to have on our panel 2 wonderful directors in Lisa Cortes and Charles Stone III, as well as Josh Braun, whose company Submarine Films has helped many filmmakers get their work seen by audiences around the world in every media imaginable. Before we start talking to our panelists, I'd like to take a few minutes to briefly introduce each of our panelists to you. Lisa Cortes is an Academy-nominated, Emmy-winning producer and director. She is renowned for creating challenging, visionary stories and empowering inclusive voices. Most recently, Lisa co-directed the wonderful film All In: The Fight for Democracy, which film chronicled the battle against voter suppression waged by Stacey Abrams. Lisa executive produced the Lee Daniels film Precious in 2009, which received the Sundance Audience Award and Grand Jury Prize for Best Drama. Precious was also nominated for 6 Academy Awards and won 2. Lisa's directorial debut, the remix Hip Hop X Fashion, now on Netflix, traces the impact of street fashion and African-American creativity on global cultural trends. Lisa, it's truly a pleasure to see you again and to have you on our panel this afternoon.
Hi, Craig.
Charles Stone attended the Rhode Island School of Design, where he received a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in animation in 1988. After graduating, he first worked as an animator and special effects designer for a small film production company. And from there, he moved on to directing over 36 music videos for artists such as Living Colour, Public Enemy, and The Roots, and in the process won numerous music industry awards. It was Charles's 3-minute short True in 1999, which he directed, wrote, and appeared in, that caught the attention of Anheuser-Busch executives and prompted them to sign him up to direct their Budweiser commercials. His memorable Budweiser TV campaign, known as What's Up, won many awards. His short film also impressed producer Damon Dash, who asked Charles to direct the feature film Paid in Full, starring McKee Pfeiffer. And Charles also directed the wonderful film Drumline, which was when he and I first met. Charles has recently been involved in directing a pilot for a new TV series entitled Saturdays for the Disney Channel, featuring Omar Gooding and Golden Brooks. Charles, thank you for taking the time out to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Craig.
Finally, and by no means least, Josh Braun runs Submarine Entertainment, a hybrid sales and production company consulting and strategizing on the sale, distribution, and development of documentaries, feature films, and non-fiction entertainment programming, as well as producing feature films, documentaries, and television properties himself. Josh was a producer on Andrew Rossi's Sundance competition documentary Page One inside the New York Times, and was an executive producer on Celine Diony's Blank City, as well as on David Cronenberg's Oscar and Golden Globe nominated A History of Violence. Josh recently produced House of the Devil, directed by Ty West, and executive produced the documentary features Seamless, Gramercy Park Hotel, Cat Dancers, Shadow Billionaires, Easy Rider, Raging Bulls, Kill Your Idols, and recently sold was an executive producer on Planet Green's series Boomtown. Josh, nice to have you with us this afternoon as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
At the end of us finishing the questions with the panelists, we're hopefully going to have a little bit of time for you and the audience to ask some questions, which you're able to do by directing your questions to the producer, who will then, through chat, communicate them to me at the end of this discussion. I'd like to start off by asking each of our panelists, what was it about your current careers that motivated you to want to pursue a career in the arts, and how did you get your start in such careers? Was there some pivotal moment or event that crystallized, what you wanted to do? Charles, maybe we'll start with you. And in answering the question, maybe talk a little bit about how True came about in 1988 and how that helped your path in terms of directing Drumline and Paid in Full.
Well, the short of it is probably, television and movies that, inspired me, but namely lots of animation growing up, whether it be Japanese animation from the 60s and 70s, as well as Bugs Bunny cartoons from the 40s that still played, on loop on television. Star Wars was a big influence, and a lot of stop motion animation, fantasy films, and a lot of the animators, the actual creators of that I became really obsessed with as a kid, and thought, okay, I want to get into being a special effects animator. And I ultimately ended up going to college or art school for animation. But those were some of the things that really motivated me to know that I wanted to create art in the moving picture realm. It's interesting you want me to talk about True or that short film. That was the first moving picture narrative I had ever done, meaning, because I'd done music videos before that in the 90s, but True was the first thing I wrote and directed that was, that involved dialogue. And it was the thing that, to be very honest and candid about it, was the first thing for me as a professional that said, okay, yeah, you can do this. Like, of all the people that I admired from, that I still admire, Spielberg, Kurosawa, Spike Lee, and so on, that this little short was the thing that was evidence that quietly gave me permission to steamroll ahead and move into the feature film world.
And how did that short kind of help, get you in touch with, producers so that you could get into, Paid in Full and Drumline? And how valuable was it having that short content to show your ability to direct dialogue and narrative and content?
Well, it's interesting because, let's see, that's the late 90s. So music video directors were still this sort of like hot sort of new commodity, and studio and network execs would continually watch certain directors, like Spike Jonze and Roman Coppola and Michael Bay and Dominic Sena. There was a myriad of music video directors from that generation, which I was also a part of. So I would always get from friends of mine or colleagues saying, you should go to LA and do meetings. Like, that was the saying, was always like, you should go do meetings. And I knew that I was well respected in the music video business, but my work in music videos wasn't at the level of popularity like the people like Michael Bay and Spike Jonze and Hype Williams were directing, Michael Jackson, Madonna in her period, like all that. So I knew I had to design something that would be a signature of who I am as a storyteller. And, and then True was the thing that I created. So to kind of distill it is that I felt like I needed evidence of me as a storyteller, not just through my music videos, because you could, and still to this day, can get hired based on the popularity of something almost more than its actual creative sort of substance. So in this case, True helped me to get, agents and lawyers such as yourself and so on to move into that realm.
Great, thank you. Lisa, I recently read in a Variety article where you talked a little bit about how certain events in your early childhood helped lay the foundation, for your career in the film industry. And perhaps, you can talk a little bit about this and how you took your first steps to becoming a storyteller and even perhaps how you got involved with Leon Precious.
Well, I think, my storytelling is always intimately connected to changing an American narrative that oftentimes has demonized or made invisible Black people, people of color, people who are assumed, have been marginalized. And, I always think about the moment that lit a spark about the power of representation and the power of principled defiance. And that's something that happened when I was in kindergarten, and I came home. I was very upset and shared with my mother that I got into trouble because I made a picture and it had just a bunch of my family, brown folks, Black folks. And I was told that I did something wrong. And my mother was like, oh, well, we're going to have a little visit with your teacher tomorrow. I remember, I'll never, I'm still time traveling now as I tell the story because, my mother took, 5-year-old Lisa and told my teacher that I could draw whatever I wanted to. And there was no way that she would allow for her to edit my creativity. And really, I so appreciate both of my parents for their work with the civil rights movement, but just what they showed me and how the importance of art to change narratives, but also to speak to those who would want to restrict your voice. I think if I now work primarily in documentaries, even though I am producing and looking at narrative works to direct. But for many years, I was Lee Daniels' producing partner, and from Monsters Ball to Precious. And, I think one of the underlying instincts, or structure of that company was to work independently. All of our projects were funded, with the exception of Monsters Ball, by, not by a studio. We hired and gave opportunities to young directors who would not have been approved within the system, and really created unique marketing opportunities and international exposure for stories that were provocative and once again were disrupting kind of expected narratives and introducing new ideas and communities through the visual representation.
Thank you so much. Josh, I'm truly fascinated about your path into the film industry. I read in Wikipedia that you and your brother started a post-punk no-wave band called Circus Mort with Rick Oller and Michael Gira, and then later went on to form Swans. And then after the breakup of that, you and your brother joined the Del Byzantians with Jim Jarmusch, the filmmaker. And I'm just trying to figure out how did that lead you to your path of getting involved in the film industry?
It is a great question. Thank you so much for having me. By the way, I just want to quickly say that my bio that you read was from 2005. So there are a few more updated entries. If you go to our website, submarine.com, there's a slightly more recent projects I worked on. But it's funny because really my whole mindset was only geared towards music. When I was growing up, we had this little sort of pseudo Partridge Family style family band when I was 11, and we would play neighborhood kids, and it was just from that point forward, hearing, we were just listening to everything. We were listening, like Marvin Gaye was like our favorite singer of all time, but we also loved Led Zeppelin and we loved Roxy Music, and it was just a wide everything. We were just taking it all in, and that sort of led to my goal of just being in bands and playing music. I had no interest in business. I didn't go to college. I just threw it all away and said, I'm moving to New York, start a punk band. Is that too noisy? Because someone my neighbor just decided to start using the leaf blower. If it's too noisy, let me know and I'll move to another room. So yeah, I mean, that's all I cared about. So when I moved to New York, I just started playing in bands. Like everyone in the late 70s, early 80s that I was friends with was in bands, and that's all it was about. At a certain point, I decided to get a job because I had to pay the rent, and I found a job at a TV company called Fremantle. And my whole mindset was, okay, the thing that I care about is the music, and anything else is just in service of that. 10 years later, I came to this realization when the band didn't become successful, even though we did get out there, we had videos and we toured but we didn't quite get there. And at a very crucial moment, should I move? Is it really too noisy? Are you hearing that? Is it okay?
I think we can make it work. I think it's okay.
Okay, so sorry about that. My neighbors suddenly decided this is the moment to use the leaf blower. So about 10 years in at Fremantle, I'd become senior vice president of sales, and I just realized that I actually was interested and passionate in this thing that I learned sort of begrudgingly. And I made the decision to stop focusing on music and to focus on my career at the time in the television industry. But even at that point, I was really more interested in film, and I was I became friends early on with people like Ted Hope and Christine Vachon in the independent scene in New York City. And it was sort of like my goal was to transition from television into film. And even though I kept playing, my little synthesizer at home and occasionally played the guitar, music was sort of fading into the background. And by let's say 1999, I made the decision to just walk into my boss's office and just quit with nothing. I didn't have another job. I didn't have anything. I just said it was tied to, the start of the millennium. So the day after January 1st, 2000, I walked in and quit. All my friends told me I was crazy. People thought I was insane. I had a really good job, well-paying job. But I had essentially, not to go on too long, but I had optioned 2 properties at that time. The book Easy Rider's Raging Bull to do as a documentary. I'd become very interested in documentary at that point. We'd actually done a little mini sort of marketing project for Absolute with Spike Lee and Mary Herron and Chris Smith, where it was like a little documentary generator. And it was very rudimentary for that time, but it sort of got me interested. And, in that transition between going from Fremantle to Submarine, I took a job producing a series called Split Screen on the Independent Film Channel with John Pearson. And I said, I'll take the job if I can produce a mini documentary in every episode. And so he agreed, and that sort of kept pulling me into the world of docs. And shortly within the next year or two, it became clear that there was an opportunity in the marketplace, that documentaries were not perceived as valuable at that time. They were perceived as difficult to sell, small, educational, and all the things that make you think of taking medicine instead of, having fun. And, in that period, in the early period of that, let's say 2002 to 2005 was the turning point when documentaries started to really become viable as, either entertainment or as more than just something educational that you see on PBS with films like Spellbound and Super Size Me and Control Room and March with the Penguins. So anyway, that's the quick version of the path.
Thank you. Lisa, one of the questions I think that young filmmakers have is trying to figure out how do they partner up with, producers, and how does that relationship come about, and how does that relationship work? And one of the things that sometimes comes up between a producer and a director is conflict. The director, I found in the years of representing directors, will sell their souls for another frame of movie, and producers sometimes have the agenda of wanting to finish the film and get it sold. And as young filmmakers, you often don't have, the leverage. And so one, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how, as a filmmaker, you form a relationship with a producer, and maybe talk a little bit about how you deal with the issue of conflict that invariably is going to arise in that relationship.
Well, I think the secret of all relationships is trust. And trust is something that you just don't add water to. It's developed over time. It's developed by showing up and almost kind of being intuitive in a way to get a sense of what is going to make this the best experience for everyone involved. How can you support the entire team? And it's really listening, interrogating what is important, and then finding ways to amplify that in the process of creation. And I would say that when conflicts come up, it always comes down to the deal. It comes down to the agreement on one hand, but it also comes down to a human factor. You typically don't want to kind of pull out your contract and say, you can't or cannot do that. I think you really always want to come back to the kind of ground zero of why you and your collaborators have decided to make a commitment to one another, which is going to go on for years. And what is the integrity of this project that it was so important that it drew you in and everyone else? Unfortunately, if you have to pull out agreements, I would use that as the very, very last ditch effort, because I think it then is going to kind of sow a type of discord that doesn't disappear that quickly. This is more than collaborating what we do. It's truly about a Vulcan mind meld for the various members of your team. And that only I think happens when you are open and trusting and willing to be of service to the work first and then to your team.
Thank you. Charles, you've had the experience of both working on independent films and studio films, and often on studio films, the degree of control that the studio insists upon, both contractually and sometimes in practice, can be quite different than in an independent film. And I'd be curious just to hear about your experiences and your thoughts on how you've had to deal with conflict from time to time on the creative side of trying to get your vision heard.
Well, first of all, I want to say Lisa, sister, she was dropping some beautiful words there. The integrity of the project. There's so many things that she was saying that I was smiling, but from the position of a jaded studio director, in the sense of the challenges of working with a lot of people who all have an agenda in terms of the project or even the project that they're making. An agenda is kind of an aggressive word in a way, and I don't mean to. Well, no, I do mean to be that way, because sometimes I'll speak as a director who, having done studio projects or films, is that it's important, to come from the position of the work first, right? The idea, the integrity of the idea, something that Lisa was just talking about, and then making sure that all the other parties, meaning the party that is paying for it and going to distribute it, and all the various departments within that company or studio or network, that they are in agreement with what it is that you and your producer are presenting or interpreting. Because again, it's, in my case, doing a studio film, in the cases that I've done, there have been scripts that have been sent to me. I react to the script, meaning the script's already been attached to a studio, and they're going to make this film. And then, so I'm a director for hire, I guess you would say, is a title for that. So I react to the script. I pitch my reaction to the studio. The studio likes my reaction, and then we go forward and create my reaction to the script to kind of play it in the base level. But making sure, from my point of view, is to make sure we're all on the same page, in that when we move forward to take this journey, which can range from anywhere from 9 months to 3 or 4 years, that we are clear and honest, is a word that Lisa used again, trust, that we're honest about what we are doing. And I think with studio ventures, there are two things involved, and probably the other nuanced things, but it's money and entertainment, right? In the cases that I have experienced, so I don't want to generalize too much, but where there's an agenda to make the money back, and to hopefully to make money, to profit, but also to entertain. And with that being said, and especially nowadays, I think in the studio system, the marketing department is an equal, if not sometimes more powerful creative entity in the relationship of making the movie. That they have now become this, like I go to the marketing department and I begin that discussion, that relationship, and making sure that in many ways, what I want to do is clear with what they want to do. So I could ramble on and on about that, but it really is a thing of trust and being candidly clear about what we as a group are going to be doing together. And in my experiences so far, I've had a myriad of interesting sort of, just experiences. Paid in Full, my first feature with Dimension Films, which is known as a genre studio, right? Scary movie, and a myriad of other entertaining, genre films. I told them when I pitched to them, I said, I don't want to do a New Jack City. Like, I don't want to do a glorified version. I want to do something that's reality based. The cinematography is real. And they agreed. And I remember, what's his name? I remember the head of the company saying, well, as long as people are getting shot and things explode. And he was making a joke, but in the end, I created exactly what I said, and they shelved it for an entire year because it freaked them out, because they didn't, I guess, think I was going to do what I was going to do. And it eventually came out in I forgot, 93 screens or something like that. And it became a cult hit thing, but nonetheless, that was one situation. And there are so many others that I could obviously ramble on. But yeah, it's all about the relationship. It's all about being clear. And I do want to just state that the relationship between the producer and director, in my experiences, changes. Like, I have a producing partner now, Tom Gorai, who's done a myriad of films in his own right as a producer. He and I are working together, developing projects. Producers I've worked with in the past, it's producers who are already attached to a project through the studio. They may suggest me, and then I come into that relationship. So if I dare speak for those kinds of producers, they're in the position where they really have this relationship, intimate relationship with the studio, who's paying for it, and an intimate relationship with the director, who is helping to realize it creatively or render it creatively. And I think that's kind of different from, you have a producer that's with you, and you two together go as a team and end up relating with the studio.
Interesting. Unless you're a final cut director, ultimately it does have to be a collaboration. And what I can say is, as a lawyer who's been lucky enough to represent final cut directors, even then it still has to be a collaboration, because ultimately everyone in theory has the same agenda, which is you want your end product to be seen by as many eyeballs as possible. And you also have to have the ability to step back and be objective. And I remember in one particular case, the studio came to my client and said, look, we really are struggling with the third reel in this movie, and we really would like you to consider making a whole bunch of changes. And the director came to me and said, look, I'm a final cut director. They know what my vision was. Do I really even have to respond to this? And I said, look, ultimately making a movie is a collaboration and a partnership. why don't you take the weekend, look at the changes they're asking you to make, put them through the system, take a look at them, and out of the 13 or 14 changes they've asked, you may agree with none of them, or you may agree with 2 of them or 3 of them. And going through that process, and that gets back to the question of trust and a collaboration. If you only agree to 2 of them and your producing partner feels you've been through the process to address their concerns, you're 90% of the way there in kind of keeping, in keeping that, relationship going. So it is something, to think about. Lisa, I wanted to ask you a little bit about All In, which you co-directed with Liz Garbus. And I'm curious, what was that? How did that collaboration come about? What was it like co-directing, a project with somebody else? And would you do it again?
I think All In was such a dream project on numerous levels. I think, the glue with Stacey Abrams was when we met with her, just seeing that I think Liz and I brought different things to the storytelling, but a concerted perspective on the journey we wanted to take people on. And the film, was made with a very specific delivery date in mind, so that it could be out and in conversation last fall before the general election. And so what we were able to do was to divide and conquer, and really capture the history, but also contemporary stories in a very concise timeline. And so I think that was the joy of co-directing, but also co-directing with mutual respect for what each of us brought as filmmakers, but also with our own personal histories. Would I co-direct again? Absolutely. It all depends on so many factors. But I do want to lean into something that we've just been talking about, and that Charles was saying, is ultimately in this space, and I think I'm not certain of the range of our audience, it is about cream. Cash rules everything around me. So whether you're working with a studio or you're doing, you have some great investors who are supporting you, there is always a responsibility to find that very delicate balance between art and commerce. You want to make the best film, a film that, you can have a great return for your investors, so that they will continue to support independent cinema, or that will be successful for the studio. And I think that is, something that we have to think about when you look at the budget for a project, who you cast. Your success has to do a lot with many factors that affect the ultimate bottom line and what you hope you are able to generate at a box office or sale. Because certainly the landscape has changed right now when it comes to your theatrical showing.
Thank you. Josh, when you look around on the internet, there seems to be a film festival taking place somewhere in the world every day of the week. As someone who's involved in selling films and documentaries, maybe you could talk a little bit about the importance of documentary. If you're a filmmaker, how do you choose which is the right festival, for you? And just talk a little bit of how you get involved in selling films, so that the audience can get a little bit of understanding about where you come into the mix.
Sure. I do just want to give a quick shout out to Tom Gorai, who I worked with on a film called Nostalgia, and he was an incredible producer. So Charles, you have good taste. great guy, very talented, and anyone on this Zoom should be picking them up and hiring him. But anyway, yeah, I think just quickly in terms of our process, we have what I would describe as a boutique sales company that is primarily focused on documentary features and series. And, that is not that we don't sell narrative features, but, the ratio of what we sell in any given year has shifted. And it's really more towards documentaries in the past 5 or 6 years. We've always been known as the documentary sales company, which I love because that's my passion. We see films that get submitted in large volumes, and it's sometimes hard to keep up, but we try to see everything that comes in. Many of our films that we end up representing are through relationships and previous producers and filmmakers that we work with. In fact, Lisa and I worked on a project years ago, and we're now embarking on another project soon. And, we'd like to have repeat business because we love to build our relationships. In the end, if we sign something, it's usually on its way to a festival. It's maybe a rough cut or a fine cut, or it's a film that's been submitted to a festival. And the easiest thing for us to consider is a film that is about to launch at a big festival like Toronto or Sundance or Cannes. And those are also being heavily sought after by our competitors, but those are the sort of low-hanging fruit. Then there are projects that we will see early and decide we see something here, we believe in it, we love it, we want to help foster it. So we might come in at an earlier stage when we're seeing 10 or 15 minutes of footage rather than a whole completed cut. And of course, it's important to say it that not every film is going to get into Sundance, Toronto, or Cannes. And there are plenty of other festivals out there. The real question, and I think what can be valuable to those listening, is the festivals that move the needle for sales are very specific, and all the companies out there that are doing sales are focused on those festivals. There's a small handful. But the importance of regional festivals, where it is not the festival where a buyer is going to show up and make an offer on your film, but it's so important. It's an ecosystem, and what it does is create awareness, and it essentially gives the filmmaker the experience of having the film. I'm talking about in normal times. Obviously, pandemic times, it's a whole different ballgame. So I'm maybe saying optimistically what it normally would be, because I want it to return that way. But festivals are where you meet your kind of class of 2021. You meet up and coming filmmakers along the way, and you become friends and have contacts, and then you collaborate later on. It's so crucial. And I guess most importantly, you see your film in front of an audience, and you get the feedback and the excitement of being part of a community, and it's so crucial. But from our sales point of view, while there's certainly a ton of great, really important regional festivals, we don't necessarily attend those. We will encourage our filmmakers to go there, but they just don't move the needle for us on the sales front. And so it's very specific what we're looking for, because in the end, if the buyers aren't there, the sellers aren't there, and vice versa. So it is sort of like a relatively curated list.
Thank you. Charles, over the last probably 5 to 10 years, we've seen a real growth and evolution of television, becoming an art form perceived in a way I think was very different than it was even 20 years ago. And as someone who started out as, on the feature side, you're now also doing work on the TV side. From a creative perspective, and just from an experiential perspective, how do you find the difference between working in the two medium, and any thoughts to share with the audience?
Well, a couple things. Yes, I agree that television has really become an amazing canvas for storytelling and very candid storytelling. And so that has inspired me to get involved in television. I think as a creator of content, it's a good place to go, and that's something that myself and my producing partner Tom are looking at venturing into. But the other reason why, as a director, as a storyteller, I go is for exercise. I mean, I recommend every feature film director direct TV episodic, because you're basically making a feature film in like 15 days. It's brutal. It's really intense, and it's just good cardio. Like, it's like you have to know your ABCs and your multiplication tables of being a director, of you got to learn to be a photographer in a way, of how to do shots. All of that really comes into play because it moves so fast. So I love it for that. I don't particularly, well, a part of me doesn't like that I'm coming into a family that's already existed. You know, as a feature film director, you help to build the family. You help to assemble the crew, and you come together, you create together, and it dissolves together. In TV episodic, you know, I'm a substitute teacher. You know, you come in, you make sure that the kids know all the chapters they got to read, and then you got to make the day. I mean, that's a kind of a cold way of saying it, but I think there's a reality to it, because everyone I say that to in the TV world, they always get a giggle and they agree. So that kind of feels a little, you know, funny, but again, it's great exercise. If you're a content creator, television is a wonderful venture to explore, because it's not just ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. There are so many, you know, networks now to create, and they're all starting to win awards. You know, even that, like, I remember when, I think it was Fox had, it was a police show, but it with the actor Chickless was in it. But anyway, it started stealing awards away from the main networks, and it changed the game. And obviously HBO, you know, dominates, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, the TV thing is good on multiple fronts.
Lisa, speaking to our audience of young filmmakers, what do you see as some of the challenges that are going to face both young filmmakers and established filmmakers like yourself in the years to come? And what are some of the things you might recommend that people should avoid in the early stage of their careers, and some of the things that they should focus on?
I'm not leaning into challenges. Seriously though, if you have passion for this, like, to do what we do, you need to, like, you know, in Josh's case, to be watching films all the time and trying to make the best deal for your clients. With Charles' case, like, bringing new talent in and introducing, you know, I think of his work, and I think of, you know, the actors that he cast, who now have gone on to, like, you know, be huge, but he saw something in them. So, like, if you are in this space, if you have this bug, you stay committed, you build community, you work with what is your unique access. I think that is something to always think about when you are creating, is what is the IP, that unique story that you have that nobody else has, and how can you then build a community that is going to join you on this journey to realize your story. It's oftentimes I have very long days, challenging days, but I always think about, like, how lucky I am, and how I don't want to do anything else. And if that's how you feel about what you are creating, you will always attract the right people, maybe not in the most timely fashion, but the right ones will show up, and you will be able to lean into, you know, what your heart has put kind of on the mantle.
Thank you. Josh, in the last 20 years, we've continued to watch change in our industry, and particularly in the way content is viewed. And the last 12 months has perhaps been the most pronounced, when the ability to watch content, you know, in a cinema has become, you know, a challenging environment. When you look forward to where you think audiences are going to consume content, over the next few years and the years to come, what do you think are going to become some of the trend lines that people should look out for?
Well, I base this answer partly on my own kind of evaluation of where I hope it would be, and also what I sort of see in at least part of the community that we all exist in, is that there's nothing greater and more kind of like simple and easy than to turn on your TV and hopefully it's a big screen and you watch, you binge a great series that you want to watch, or you watch a movie that you've been dying to see that you saw an ad for. But at the same time, I can't wait to see a movie in a theater. I mean, I'm planning to do it this weekend or maybe next weekend. That's all I've been thinking about. I saw one movie during the pandemic, which was Tenet, in a theater in Florida that had 400 seats and there were 7 people in there, but it was the best thing that happened all year. And it was just so thrilling. I mean, I love the movie, but I also love just being able to watch it. I probably would have loved watching, a Cheerios commercial if that was playing, just because it was like the experience reminded me of like, oh, this is one of the things that I really love. Like I forced myself to forget, and you kind of write it off and you think you're not going to have. So I think that other people, I can't be the only one that feels that way. And I think certainly the question then is like, what would get you into a theater? A movie like Tenet would get me into a theater anytime. But honestly, there are other great movies that you want to see and aren't about the visuals, but they're about the emotion or they're about the group experience. And that often can be documentaries. Some documentaries are big and visual, but others are, like a group mind meld in a room where you can feel people being moved all in the same time. And so I think those experiences are what people crave, and particularly after being locked up in our living rooms for 18 months. So I think that it's going to look a little differently. There'll be certainly people who are afraid to go to theaters for a while longer, even after they get vaccinated. I know people who are fully vaccinated who still won't eat at a restaurant. They won't go to a movie theater. They won't get on an airplane. So it's going to take a little time. But I think in some intrinsic way, people want to have what they had. And if they can have it in some version, I think it's going to come back.
Well, I hope so. I'm like you. I like the experience of being with people watching something and sharing, that common experience. So as soon as I've had my second shot on Friday, I'm ready to dive in. I'd like to finish with the last question for our panelists to you, Charles, which is, in the last few years, our industry has certainly tried to take steps to become more inclusive, involving issues of minorities, of gender, and color. As a person of color, what challenges did this present to you early on in your career? And are you now seeing a positive change, or do we still have a long way to go?
To give the Cliff Notes version of that answer, rather, is, well, experiences, there were many, but one that was probably the most poignant early on was when directing Drumline, and we were finalizing the budget, and we needed another additional amount of money, and we presented it to the physical producer and to the studio, and then the head of the studio at the time said, if you want that additional money, you gotta make one of these characters white. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'm gonna, go to Shoot Magazine and blah, 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 and Hollywood Reporter and blow this out the water and yada, yada, yada. And I thought, well, a Craig Emanuel-esque voice in my head said, well, look at the big picture. What's the big picture? And can I still achieve what I needed to achieve? And how can I make that work? And I did. And the rest is I guess history of sorts. So there's always been these little nuanced things that would happen in the industry. In terms of today, to get to that, because I think that's really more important, is that there are wonderful movements happening, you know, and I'm not going to be able to name everybody, but from the Shonda Rhimes to the Lena Waiths, these are all big, these are substantial producers in the business, both TV and in features. Kenya Barris, and there's, again, I apologize, there's cats who even farther back that have been doing it, who are names for themselves. So we are making progress in terms of having creative voices and executive and producerial voices that are there to help to build a foundation that is American. And it's so nutty for me to have to say it that way, but we have to, there's something that has happened lately, which is the whole woke concept, which I appreciate because it really discusses the mindset of systemic racism, you know, the nuances and the granular things that really work together in a cumulative manner to create, you know, racism in the business. And that's not just, you know, and not just racism, gender bias. I mean, it's, you know, so I find that what is happening and what we have to be mindful of and diligent of in a very Stacey Abrams-esque kind of way, which is to hold one's feet to the fire, including our own, including mine, to making sure that we get more people of color, and I say people of color, that's also Asian American, Indian American, women as well, gay and trans population as well, that we get people in positions of executive producing, and even film crew. Like this, just, you know, from the grips, the gaffers, craft services, etc. That and writers. Oh my goodness, so important. The content creators, the writers, that we get more people of color in those positions to start to actually change the roots of the tree that is the industry of storytelling. And that is the thing I think that is happening. But again, we have to be diligent and we have to stay on that, because we're on a roll a little bit in terms of this woke kind of point of view. And it's not just, you know, well, you got a black president, so what's the problem? You know what I mean? It's it's really not that. It's so much deeper than that. Very much as we know what happened today in terms of the verdict being a positive three, you know, guilty on all three charges. It's just a stepping stone. And if we're not diligent, it means nothing. So that's what's got to happen now, I think.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of the fact that we've run out of time. I know that we did have a couple of questions, and for those of you who asked the questions, we are going to submit them to the panelists, and they will be able to respond over the course of the next week. I really would like to take this time to thank my three panelists who gave up their time and shared some really valuable information with us this afternoon. So thank you. You know, as someone who truly loves the business that we're in, and I've been working in the industry now for more than 35 years, what I can tell you, if I was to give any word of advice at all, is that there's nothing easy about this business, but there's also nothing more fulfilling than starting off with an idea and watching it come to fruition. And don't give up on those ideas. And maybe they won't get made this year or next year, but those great stories are always out there and need to be told. And today we're lucky, as I think Josh said, that there are more places, or Charles said, to have content viewed than ever before. And it can be short content, long content, serialized content, and keep that, you know, in mind. I think the other thing that I would say is, if you're a young filmmaker, or even if you're a young producer, a young writer, don't try and create stories to meet somebody else's expectations. The best stories that you have, your best work, is that comes from here and in your heart, and is something that you're truly compassionate about. As a filmmaker, you're the captain of the ship, and you're the one who is going to lead the story. So be passionate about what you want to do and make things that you care about. So again, thank you to my three panelists. We really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm going to turn this back over to Opal to close this session out.
Our thanks again to Craig Emanuel and to all of his panelists, Josh Braun, Lisa Cortes, Charles Stone III. Thank you all so much for joining us. Also, thanks to our team at the March on Washington Filmmaker, Vernal Rogers, Roderick Johnson, and our ASL interpreters. Be sure to join us on Tuesday, May 18th, when the spotlight will be on the role of producers in our workshop series, Minding Your Movie Business. For more details, please visit marchonwashingtonfilmfestival.org. This is Opal H. Bennett. Until next month, march on.